Los Angeles Clippers had a complete meltdown against the Houston Rockets in Game 6 of the second round. Phil, I know you didn't see the game live. I think you saw some tweets and stuff, and you watched it afterwards. What were your thoughts as a stats guy about? I mean, they had a 19-point lead going into the fourth and lost by 12 points at home.
I mean, I think this was a culmination of the Clippers just getting really cold and the Rocks getting really hot. Two stats that came out right away for me was Josh Smith, who is normally, we've spoken to him in the past.
He was on the trash sheet.
He was on the trash sheet. He went 5 for 9 from the field, good efficiency, and 4 for 7 from threes. He was 19 and 6. He had 14 points in the fourth quarter, and his countermate, Corey Brewer, had 19 and 10 and 15 points in that fourth quarter. So combined, Corey Brewer and Josh Smith had 29 points in the fourth quarter, hitting almost everything.
And the other side of the coin is that the Clippers were stone cold. They couldn't buy a basket. Blake Griffin, I think, would go for 5. Historically, I mean, you can talk about games like when the Sacramento Kings had a meltdown, I think in 2000 against the Lakers. I mean, this reminded me, if you've seen the movie Moneyball, that scene where Brad Pitt walks in the arena. He didn't go to watch their games. He went to the stadium, and everything just fell apart. Just everything. And I saw this great tweet by a reporter in LA, and basically said, all the fans, because this game was at Staples Center, all the fans basically stood there the entire fourth quarter, silently, quietly, not knowing what to do.
Including the owner, who is a very vocal guy who was just there kind of watching. Well, the fourth quarter was 40-15 for the Rockets. 40 points for any team in any quarter.
The elephant in the room is that James Harden, the runner-up for MVP of the league, didn't even play. He played a millisecond of the fourth quarter.
Well, I was bringing him up because those two guys I mentioned play Harden's position, Corey Brewer, Josh Smith, at certain points. Because I think at that point, James Harden was something like minus 23 in the game in the plus-minus.
He wasn't playing.
And the coach was like, well, we're playing terribly, why not shake it up? And I won't call them ragtag guys, but they really put together. Dwight Howard was 20 and 21, seemingly grabbing every rebound available.
Setting picks. He was doing a lot of stuff.
And Terrence Jones, 16 and 5. It's just that whole team was incredibly efficient. Dwight Howard is doing what he needs to do. They're spreading the ball around. So I guess the question with what you brought up with James Harden is James Harden a ball stopper? Because without him, the ball was moving, good shots were taken. I mean, those guys aren't always going to hit that kind of percentage. But do you think that this speaks more, like to me, does it speak more to James Harden? Does it speak more to how lucky the Rockets were in terms of the shooting, or does it speak more to the Clippers and how they just fell apart defensively and offensively?
Well, I think this was just a perfect storm. Jason Terry, you got to mention him. He was playing some stellar D out there as well. Kudos to Kevin McHale, coach of the Houston Rockets, to have the stones to say, you know what, I'm going to sit this guy because these guys are rolling. You have to go with momentum. The chemistry was there between the 5 guys in the court, and he stood with it.
Do you think that affects Game 7 and the next round?
Yeah, you could say what you want about Harden being kind of a vocal cheerleader on the bench. You know he's the type of ego-driven guy who wants to play. He was sitting there stretching out, trying to get on the court every
Well, if you're a superstar and you don't want it, there's
Yeah.
something worrisome there, right?
But obviously, I think this is a bit of a legacy game. People are talking about, compared to a couple of years ago when he was in the NBA Finals with OKC, he didn't do much. He wasn't out there in this absolutely shining moment for their franchise. So yeah, of course this is going to affect him. He's going to want to go out there, hopefully, and score 40 and win this game today in Game 7.
But is he going to continue that ball movement that made him so successful, right? Like, they seem to find their secret sauce in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you can't not play James Harden, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think long-term, the success will not be there if you don't play James Harden.
Well, that's the rub, right? I have a feeling that because they played well and because Harden wasn't a part of it, there's going to be...
Do you take the ball out of his hands a little bit more and make him play off-ball?
I find, like we said before in the last segment, you have to go with what got you there. And the way they played all season, this is not the way they played all season. And so, quite a dilemma, a paradox, I'd say, for Kevin McHale. I think they're going to have issues for this game and try and figure out which way they're going to play.
Although on a positive note, as I mentioned with the numbers, Dwight Howard continuing to have playoff success.
Yeah.
He's one of the players who's, outside of LeBron, perhaps, maybe just deserved a lot of it, but he's had to deal with a lot of criticism the last bunch of years. But he's putting his money where his mouth is. I mean, And speaking of centers, did you find it strange they went from the Haka DeAndre to kind of, he only shot 9 free throws?
Yeah, I think they stepped back from it. It wasn't working initially. It's been killing the flow for both teams. I think it was just, we got to try something
Although
different.
if you're Houston, I've always said this is the point, and I'm glad you mentioned the flow.
Right.
I've always said the Clippers' Achilles heel is that half-court offense.
Right.
When you have DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin and Chris Paul and such flying up the court, no one's going to stay with them. JJ Redick, Matt Barnes off the wing for a step-back three. I get all this. When you have to slow them down. So if you're Houston, don't you like interrupting the flow, playing that half-court basketball, set shots, having Dwight do his thing?
Well, I mean, Harden is also a running gun guy, step back three type of guy. He likes to be up and down the court.
Although
so.
I find he's a bit better half court than the Clippers guys.
When he's engaged, yes. He's the type of guy
It's a weird question for a
not,
superstar, right?
well,
you have to question his engagement.
He's an enigma. He always has been. I think he always will be. And so because they have these question marks going into Game 7, I really do give it to the Clippers, even though the game is being played in Houston. And also, you can't discount Blake Griffin. Beyond that fourth quarter, he's been playing, I'll say this, he's been playing Hall of Fame basketball.
I'll agree with you there. I'm gonna stick with one of my teams from early on. I like Houston.
Really?
I'm really gonna go with Houston this game. Look, for me, it's simple. Can you hit your outside shots? Can you dominate the paint? And can you limit your turnovers? They did in the third quarter. They didn't. Fourth quarter. They didn't for the rest. If the fourth quarter Rockets come out at home, I think all these players. Look, we keep talking about Chris Paul having something to prove in terms of the playoffs. Blake Griffin as well, because he's been tied arm in arm. But Dwight Howard and James Harden have that same kind of stigma, right?
Of course. Monkey on their back.
Yeah, there's Curious George is all over the place in this one.
Gotta say this too. People have said, Bill Simmons has written about this for a long time. People saying the Clippers franchise is cursed. It started as the Buffalo Braves in Buffalo, New York in 1970. Never got past round 2. So that game, you could say there's a curse. You could say not. It's up to Blake and CP3 and DeAndre to just show that this team has the ability to go to the next level. Like you said, though, Houston, it's been a while since they've been to round 3 themselves.
Well, I'll have a last question for you. Clippers lose. Does that change how they view DeAndre Jordan's re-signing?
I think DeAndre, the fact that he even floated out that he was interested in Dallas says something to you. Like you said, there's been...
Because he's going to demand big money, and you know who your core is going to be. It's going to be the same general core because of how much you're going to have to pay Blake.
And CP3 just hit 30. And you don't want a point guard in this league on that side of 30 because things can go wrong. I mean, Tony Parker...
on many nights, he's still their best player, but
he is.
You still want those young players to start developing, and while he is young, I think DeAndre would have to significantly, as we keep saying, if he can improve his free throws, it's a different game, but...
I think DeAndre will likely be gone, just because the fact we're seeing things like the way he reacted strangely to them beating the Spurs and et cetera, et cetera. There just seems to be things written on the wall, let's put it that way. But I would really like to see the Buffalo Braves finally get to round 3. Upstate New York needs a little bit of pride, But
I think that's like saying Seattle fans are cheering for Kevin Durant in his new home. But
yeah, that's a different story. But that team was ripped away, and Buffalo had a lot of guys who actually went to the Hall of Fame. And Dr. Jack Ramsey coached that team. It was a special thing, and it actually, in a way, led to the Raptors getting a franchise. So it's interesting.
As the world turns, the NBA, right?
Yeah. So Game 7's on today, and like you said, we'll see.
And we'll see who's ranked next week.